bloody conflict, and America will lose, and America will be humiliated.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak.
February 24th, 1991. Last night, the ground war came. Young men sprang into Kuwait. Coil springs held too long. Steel springs of blood and bone, muscle and sinew in steel tanks. Behind the spring, we work like any other day. Convoys north, water, fuel, ammo trains. North of Tapline Road, north of Dodge. Around TVs, we wait. Medevac pilots wait. No missions yet. Not yet. Still we know, springs sometimes snap. Sometimes don't spring back. Ground Day 1 has come and gone. The siren song has just begun. Those probing phrases were written the day after the ground war began. They were written by a middle-aged high school history teacher from Hays, Kansas, Tom Jensen, now Captain Tom Jensen, the commander of a Western Kansas National Guard maintenance company, activated and thrust into a war half a world away. For the 185 men and women of the 170th Maintenance Company of Hays, Colby, and Goodland, their odyssey began November 29, 1990.
And in this case, the 170th, with its units of Hays, Colby, and Goodland, will travel to Fort Riley as their mobilization station. And that will occur.
Approximately 200 members are in the unit, and after being put on alert last Friday, they were notified yesterday that they will be moving from their home armories to Fort Riley this Sunday.
Approximately 1,500 hours, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and departure will be backed up. So a little bit around noon. That time is not firm yet, but late morning, early afternoon, they will be leaving from Hays, Goodland, and Colby.
Tearful eyes and solemn faces set the mood in front of the armory as the community and the local Army Reserve unit gathered around to give the 170th unit their support and respect. Many of the onlookers held flags and wore yellow ribbons, and most of them just held on to one another before saying goodbye. Carol Bryn was in Hays on Sunday to share as much time as he could with his 21-year-old son Rodney. Bryn says he feels pride as well as sadness for his youngest son going to do his duty.
I feel real proud of all the boys, or men that left. And then you feel sad, lonely. And you're scared to a certain amount too. But I guess those 4 things is...
And Bryn has every right to feel proud of his son. Aside from being a full-time student at Fort Hays State, Rodney also managed to work at Food Bonanza before getting deployed to Fort Riley. But Rodney, along with many other students who joined the Guard, won't have much time to learn anything else but military duties while working at his station. His father understands this, and he knows that his son's training has a purpose.
It's just one of those deals that I guess happens to all the people in the service. If things like this happen, that's what they're called on to try to go stop.
These Western Kansas Army National Guardsmen were but a few of the thousands of men and women from Kansas who were chosen to defend, then fight in the sands of the Arabian Desert. The Air Guard's 190th Air Refueling Group responded immediately. Their air crews began flying missions in August. The 1st Infantry Division started deploying in December, and that was followed by the Army Reserve's 129th Transportation Company, the 410th Medical Evacuation Hospital, a transportation detachment, a firefighting unit, and the 170th. The 170th went to Fort Riley in early December, and after a period of intensified training and equipment preparation, they finally gathered their gear in February, packed what they could in their individual rucksacks, said their final goodbyes, and left for Saudi Arabia. February 19th, 1991. Morning in Saudi. Wind blowing from the Gulf, leaving a salt taste in the air. Out my window, desert roses bloom, surrounded by barbed wire. Contrast of beauty in desert land and reality of war in desert sand. The busy port, gray ships unloading row upon row of hardware marked for the front. Tanks, rows and rows of tanks, trucks, Humvees, jets, gun tubes, rumble past, head north, past my window, past barbed wire, past desert roses. From the White Elephant, I plot the map. Convoys north and south, hauling water, hauling instruments of war. Armed Forces Radio brings songs from home and plays the Arabic word of the day. Tomorrow, I'll take time to pray. Saturday, February 23rd, day 39 of the air war. The liberation of Kuwait entered its final phase. The ground war began.
Well, basically, we were working, 12-hour days and 7 days a week. We had at that point, we had a Bradley mission going on at the port where we were checking and making sure that Bradleys were in a position to go up front if they were needed as a theater reserve. And so we did have a Bradley mission, and we had our truck drivers gone. 50 of them were down in the United Arab Emirates when the Scud hit. And so we were hauling water. We were working down at that site, down at the port. And so the days were long. They were 12-hour days and 7 days a week. And nobody really seemed to mind it because the war was on and everything was going forward. And we'd check how the war was going. We'd have our daily briefings, and we'd send that information on. So it was a busy time, but everybody understood the nature of it.
The Gulf War was a one-sided technological conflict. Kansans back home watched and flinched as Cable News Network brought the war live and in color into the living room. For all the pictures, for all the words, perhaps this war will be most remembered for an inaccurate airborne weapon of terror.
The Scud missile attacks were rather common in this area between the ground war and the air war. Once the ground war started, the Scud stopped because obviously their launching bases were destroyed. But this is a major target area because of the air bases and the port. And so it was rather a common occurrence to have Scuds. Now, the Patriots had been so successful in taking them out, and the Scuds were so inaccurate that it almost became second nature not to respond too much to them. Really didn't take the Scuds too seriously.
February 25th. The nation was horrified as we watched on television the devastation and destruction in Dhahran from a blindly controlled Scud missile whose intended target was probably several miles away.
As you can see, there's nothing here right now. The building has been removed. But on that fateful night, this was a warehouse full of troops. The Scud missile came in, it separated, and the warhead came down. It was a fluke. This is right next to an empty field, but somehow it hit here with devastating force.
That night, a Scud alert was sounded in the 170th Maintenance Company. Protective masks and chemical garments were put on. Guardsmen watched in fascinated awe as the Scud descended directly overhead, exploding into a fiery ball less than 2 miles away. Since the Kansans were housed in an unfinished hospital, local Saudi rescue workers took 6 of the injured to the compound courtyard for emergency treatment. Several of the Kansans were EMT trained, and they quickly began working on the injured. Not all survived that fatal blast. In all, 28 died from the Scud, and more than 90 soldiers were injured. One guardsman from Goodland had seen the horrors of war 2 decades ago in Vietnam as a Marine at Khe Sanh.
I was in the 1st Marine Division and 1st ATs. We were in Khe Sanh when Khe Sanh in 1968, January 1968, and we lost better than half our company. And it brought back memories of that particular type of ordeal that I'd gone through. I was one of the lucky ones. I come out with no scratches. But there's several of us that didn't. and it reminded me of that. It was just a mass confusion and many people being hurt, and as many people trying to help them as possible with whatever material we had available. We had one soldier that he was standing off to the side, and he just unbelievable to himself. He kept asking, is this what it's like? And the only thing I could tell him, this is the closest I know of what it's like, real war. And he was just awed. He just didn't have nothing else to say. He just broke down from that point.
As soon as it started, the fighting ceased. We had won. It was time to think about coming home, and many did. The welcomes were electric. The 190th Air Refueling Group of Topeka came home on March 14th to a frenzied crowd. They were among the first to go, and they were among the first to return. They were heroes all. But the coming home had not yet come to the 170th. The mission changed. The workload had not.
Well, then when the war was over, and it turned out there wasn't going to be really a large GS mission for us. At that point, the focus shifted to redeployment, and the hot priorities were going to be redeploying the troops out of here. That meant preparing sites to get equipment back to the States and getting troops back. And so at that point, we got a very heavy retrograde mission. We had a ship in the harbor waiting for, so many tanks, and so we had to get them prepared to ship back to Anniston. And so we set up basically what turned out to be a tank wash, pulling the engines on the M1s, cleaning all the sand out, making sure the ammo was downloaded, because all these were loaded and combat ready at that time. So we had to download the ammo, we had to clean the packs and get them ready, get them USDA inspected, get them on the ship and get them out. And we still ran our 12-hour shifts, and we still ran 7 days a week because we had a ship actually anchored and we knew how many tanks we needed.
And the cleaning continued around the clock, but now the work shifts were 8 hours instead of 12. Huge cargo ships were anchored offshore, and their appetite for tanks and fighting vehicles was immense. But before any vehicle could be driven up the ramp, it had to be cleaned and inspected. All across the country, troops were water blasting the Iraqi, Kuwaiti, and Saudi sand from their vehicles because the desert sands of the Mideast were not welcome to this country. And before any vehicle could be loaded onto a cargo ship, it had to be USDA inspected and accepted, and that included those cleaned by the 170th. With the thousands of tanks and heavy equipment, that was an impossible task. So the USDA trained a number of 170th people to take the white glove to everything they cleaned.
I inspect the tanks for like dirt and grease and plants. In order, they don't want the dirt and all that going back into the States because it carries bugs and viruses, and the plants they just don't want them over there and back in the States. We went through a couple days of school, and we took classes, what to look for, and how clean they're supposed to be, and all that.
Usually it took an average of 5 hours to clean a Bradley. Occasionally one vehicle would take all day because the caked-on desert sand and mud had to be chiseled and then pressure washed before it could be inspected. Not all of the Kansans were spending their work shifts at the wash racks. There were other projects that were tasked. Small weapons section spent their days cleaning and repairing machine guns that were fresh from the front line. And there were the endless housekeeping chores, both at the port and in the barracks.
As you know, they were under the operational control of two different agencies. One was the U.S. Army Depot Command, and one was under the 593rd Area Support Group. Under the